and welcome to our new series, Make a Scene with Video, where we explore all things video and the intersection of mission-driven organizations.
We are Make a Scene Media. We are a full-service video production company that helps nonprofits, agencies, and mission-driven organizations make an impact with storytelling. We specialize in trauma-informed and ethical production because we believe that not only can we inspire audiences from apathy to engagement, but it can also be a healing process for those who participate.
And before we talk about today's guest and kind of dive right in, I want to just give a little background about why this is important to us and a little bit more about who we are and Make a Scene. So Heather and I actually have been working together for many years. Prior to starting Make a Scene Media, we worked in the unscripted television development world. So we developed and created shows for, across all different types of genres, survival and wedding and true crime and paranormal and all kinds of things. And throughout that time, it was our job to meet people across the country, across the world, with interesting stories to tell. And so it was, our job basically to call people, interview them, and really get them to share some of the deepest, darkest memories of their life, especially when we were working in things like true crime or stories of survival, things like that.
We found that it can be a really negative experience for the people participating. They can be reliving the trauma, they can be triggered, and it can either make them not want to participate, it can make them upset with all those involved, and just be a really awful experience. And that made us feel awful in turn, and we just felt like there had to be a better way.
And it's not just about keeping the participant in mind, but it's also about keeping the crew in mind, keeping the interviewer in mind, because it is just, every person on the set is a human being, and every person comes with lived experience, and you don't know who's experienced trauma, and you don't know how hearing someone else's story might affect them. So when we started our own company, we really wanted to be mindful about how we captured stories and how it was that we then retold those stories. And I think, it all comes down to consent, which is number one. Consent means, permission, but also transparency. Somebody can't agree to something if they don't know the full picture of what's happening. So that's really important too.
We know that people telling their authentic, raw stories can really create empathy and a connection with the viewer. But we're working for organizations that want to do good in the world. So that means after the video process, we want to have added more positivity to the world. We want their population that they're working with, especially if they're a nonprofit, to feel positive about the experience. And so being trauma informed is really important right now for what we're doing.
But I feel like that's a super buzzy word. And so we wanted to do a little video where we talk to an expert about being trauma informed, what it means, and how to actually implement it in terms of video production. Super excited that we have Gretchen Soto on today, who is one of our favorite clients. Not only is she a licensed therapist, but she's also a consultant for nonprofits, helping them with their organizational strategy and really helping to put trauma and being trauma informed into the workplace and not just on a production set like we're talking today.
Absolutely. All right. Hi, Gretchen.
Hey, Gretchen. So good to see you. Gretchen, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be on with the two of you and to see you continuing the mission of the work. I'm Gretchen Soto. I'm a licensed professional counselor by training in Virginia, and I work remotely primarily now from the Yucatan, and I am the sole proprietor for a small woman-owned business by the name of Soto Training and Consultation Services that provides technical assistance to nonprofits and governmental organizations with technology transfer for clinical skills.
Gretchen, I'm so excited to have you on today. As you know, as we were talking about in the intro, we really care about being trauma informed and practicing really ethical production. And, you know, we've been in the television and the video production world for a really long time. And it's only been in the last few years that this has even been a consideration, that mental health of the participants or even the crew working on some really sensitive content is even really being considered. So I want to kind of just lay a little groundwork and what does it mean to be trauma informed? It's a very buzzy term. We hear it a lot right now, but what does that actually mean?
Thank you. Absolutely. It is a buzzy term and an important one. And I have to start by saying I never even knew of an organization that approached things in the way that Make a Scene Media does. So that in and of itself was a new concept and so exciting to not only meet someone that wanted to tell the story, but to tell it with integrity and thought about the crew, the folks behind the camera as well. So just thank you for being at the forefront of that. And when we're talking about trauma-informed care, we're really talking about the 4 Rs. That's the easiest way to remember it, right? Realize that trauma is widespread, and that the impact of trauma can be really pervasive, and that we want to understand that there are pathways for recovery. And then we want to recognize the signs and symptoms, which means you kind of have to know what some of those are, the way you ladies took time to educate yourselves about that. And that the trauma just may not be within the person that's been present for the event, but it can impact families, staff, other loved ones, and concerned others. And how we respond matters, is that third R, that you really want to understand policies, procedures, and practices that are thoughtful, and empathic and compassionate. And really, by compassion, I mean steeped in the benefit of the person on the other side of that camera, right? The person that you're holding space for. And then first, do no harm, right? Resist re-traumatization. And so if you're going in for the punchy story, that's about the story and, you know, the number of likes or clicks as opposed to the well-being of the person that's sharing that information. So those are our 4 Rs. Realize that it's there, recognize how it can present, respond with integrity and compassion and empathy, and stay away from doing harm. Really, really work to resist re-traumatization.
Yeah, I think you really nailed it on the spot, which is that in the past, productions have been like, we need the sound bite, or we only have an hour of this interview, so whatever it takes to get what we need to put on camera, that's my job. And it just has to be a conscious choice by the producer and the people involved to hold both in importance. Like, we're trying to get a story across that hopefully the participant has consented to do and wants to get out there, but also there has to be a way to do it without doing harm. Yeah. So I wanted to, the reason why we came across this with each other is we worked on a project together where we were interviewing survivors of domestic abuse and violence and trying to get their story out to the world so that all those out there who might be suffering in silence feel like they could relate, feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, that they can, you know, have a happy ending to their story too. And it's just really powerful to know that other people have had a similar experience to you, and it can be really empowering. So we worked together on a video doing interviewing multiple people, multiple survivors, and then kind of interweaving their stories with each other. And we just love some of the tips and tricks that you added to our process.
And the considerations that we were able to, because of your expertise, to be able to really craft a production process that we felt not only was going to get the job done, but be a container and a safe space for everyone involved.
Before you guys even started the process, just to piggyback on what was said there, you can have an idea, but the humility with which you approach the idea and bringing it to life is where it really starts. It's the spirit and intent of how you hold space from the beginning of the project that really informs the outcome of the project. And I think that sometimes other organizations that don't implement the same level of care and strategic intent try to tack on a trauma-informed approach after the fact as opposed to before even writing storyboard.
So Gretchen, give us a little bit of background. Talk to us about the project from your perspective.
Sure. So when you guys approached and we realized that we had two cutting edge production artists on board to bring a story like this to life for interpersonal survivors, we really had to think about the scope of who that would include. How do we help the community to understand who is impacted by domestic sexual violence, human trafficking, stalking, and the like? And so the first piece started with us having conversations and really helping you to understand that that included males. It included those that identify as LGBTQ+. It included sexual violence. It included domestic violence, impact upon the children of loved ones who were in the product of unions of domestic and sexual violence. We also included volunteers that worked with those who were healing from interpersonal violence and staff that support folks in varying capacities, whether it's as counselors or as shelter workers. And so having that wide span of voice, I think, made the project that much more contextually rich because we also broke it out into segments so that folks could go to a specific section if they wanted to be able to look at the person that looked like them, be it in color, demographic, with sexual identity or preference or gender, or worker role, employee. They had that option to be able to peruse the stories that really resonated the most with them. And then our first step for the project was really understanding what safety meant. Safety for Taylor as interviewer, safety for you, Heather, in terms of how to help craft questions and create a process that was going to hold space in a sacred way. Really, it was a spiritual experience, folks described it as, and being able to tell their stories as much as they wanted, as little as they wanted, being able to take breaks. Having it occur, we were doing this during a pandemic, so having it occur in a space where they felt not just emotionally and psychologically safe, but literally physically safe. We were facing, epic conditions that none of us had ever experienced before in terms of how to keep our physical person safe. And so thinking about what that process would look like if you were going to be giving folks cameras in their homes and equipment in their homes and then collecting that, but not being beside them in the moments that the questions were being asked. So how did we create a pre-process that was going to be grounding and orienting? How would we identify folks in a safe way? One of the things that's really tricky when you're creating projects like this and working with an organization that could be perceived as having some level of control or differential in control is making sure that when you invite folks into an opportunity, they don't feel leveraged or coerced into an opportunity. So oftentimes that means that when you're thinking about a project like this, it's putting up awareness posters of an opportunity and allowing folks to volunteer as opposed to soliciting folks. That's part of that safety process because the mere ask by a counselor, a director, a program manager, a shelter staff can have an unintended adverse consequence just by virtue of there being a power differential in that relationship. And so we had to make folks aware of opportunity in a rather organic way that didn't feel threatening or coercive in any manner. And then once you've got folks that are saying, hey, I'm interested, I think maybe I'm at a point in my healing journey where this could perhaps be empowering for me, helping them to understand what it meant, but also vetting someone's psychological, emotional, and physical safety and ability to do that in a way that's not re-injurious. You can hear us coming back to those 4 R's that we talked about, right? Making sure that we're realizing the symptomology, checking on that person's symptomology, and making sure that we couldn't perhaps do more harm with re-traumatization. I'll pause there because I'm sure there's some inherent questions as I'm rambling on about what safety looked like in preparing for that project and projects in general.
Well, two spots I want to point out that I felt like you added to our process, and I've never forgotten is one, you guys defined how long it would have been since the trauma that they were going to speak about. Were they at a point in their journey, and not even like even potentially crossing a line, being like 2 years. No one, it has to have been more than 2 years for us to talk about that story again. And that was just a parameter that you guys put on there. And I think it was a smart one. I think
you called it a rubric. Like you created a rubric of like, yeah.
And the number's arbitrary. 2 years doesn't mean that someone is healed. Someone can be 2 years out from trauma and be fully in the throes of post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And so we use 2 years as a starting point in terms of how we kind of pruned from there, right? Okay, let's look 2 years out when folks come forward and say they're interested, and then let's go through the vetting process from there as 2 years kind of being a starting, not an ending point, right? And checking with folks in terms of how they were functioning in all facets of their lives and doing an assessment. And we did that in tandem. And that really felt really good too, right? We had some clinical folks that were behind the scenes helping and supporting that initiative, some licensed therapists that were working with you guys, but you guys did your homework, right? You knew what the 4 R's meant. You understood who the organization served, the spirit and mission and vision and values of the organization that you were working with. You found out about the different touch points in the systems that the survivors who had stepped forward had interfaced with. And so this, when a project like this is approached, I think safety has to come with time. And recognizing that cultivation of relationship between therapist and survivor, production artist and survivor, and even introduction with survivor takes time.
But I think that's a really good point because I think sometimes, you get on set to a production, and I'm speaking from personal experience, you may only have 3 hours to set up, do the interview, break down, and get out of a location. And really, if productions could take more time and recognize that that interview is the most important part of, that section of whatever work you're doing, and giving that interview that space and time to be able to expand or contract as it needs to, as that person needs to share or take breaks, come back to it, I think would be so much better. I mean, because this project was over Zoom, we did have the luxury of being able to say, we can do this whenever, we can stop, we can come back tomorrow. I've worked with survivors before on another project where it took me sometimes 4 or 5 different sessions over interview to really capture the full story. And, I purposefully limited the interviews to less than 2 hours because anybody talking about emotional stuff for more than an hour or two, like that's too much. So in order to get the full story, we had to do it over 5 sessions. Now, does that take a lot of extra time? Absolutely. But is the quality of the experience of what the participant is getting to be involved in, is the story so much more complete and rich and filled with the emotion that so many producers were looking for, right? Because emotion makes an impact, which makes people pay attention, and that is ultimately what we want. But there's a way to do that without re-traumatizing someone. And by giving them the space to really, to allow them to experience the range of the emotions they feel in the time frame that their body wants them to feel it.
Yeah, and before you even get on set, as you said, trust takes time. Ideally, for a video production, the interviewer and the participant should not be meeting for the first time that day.
On set.
There should be calls beforehand. It's like, hi, I'm Heather. It's nice to meet you. This is how the process will go. Let's just chat. Tell me a bit about yourself, so that you're not strangers sitting in front of a bunch of lights sharing these
Really intense
conversations. And another bite that I've taken with me from you is just allowing the participant to start where they want to start. We've had past, especially in true crime, when you're telling the story of a crime, people think it's linear. You got to start at the beginning. Then there's a middle and there's an end. And we've adapted our style when we moved into working for nonprofits and mission-driven stuff is you can start in the middle. What's wrong with that? If the participant, it's easier for them to start with this particular detail that's in the middle, then let's start in the middle. And then we'll take the journey as the participant wants to take the journey. And if we need to have some extra time and edit, so be it.
Yeah. My first question I like to ask is like, what would you like to share with me about this topic?
Yes.
Right? Like, what are you feeling called in this moment? And it's always something surprising. Like I might go in thinking, okay, they're going to talk about this piece of it. It's always, there's magic. There's magic in letting someone lead their own story, because they are going to unlock new memories sort of sometimes. And that happens, right? Unlocking things as they're telling, because they're given that space to just let it go where it needs to.
Yeah.
You guys have summarized so beautifully, because what you're really speaking to is tying to that safety, but it's the second principle is trustworthiness and transparency, right? You go in, take the time to cultivate the relationship, explain transparently, this is the end goal, and you may find and expect and anticipate the following, right? And you fill in the blank of what that may be. You may need time after we're together to talk to someone. So we had folks available for them to speak to someone if they found that, they opened up a place and space that they didn't anticipate. You've spoken so eloquently to the fact that trauma is not linear. So to expect that somebody is going to be able to tell a story that is stored in their limbic system, right, the oldest part of our brain, and have it come out with a connect the dot in this sequential fashion is unrealistic, and it belies the safety and the transparency and the trust that you're trying to cultivate, and it diminishes the quality and the impact of the story that you'll be able to convey.
Yep.
Yeah. My spiel, even when not working with sensitive topics, is this isn't live. If you want to blather on about this or you want to go take that direction, that's fine. If you go blah, no, I want to do it again, that's fine. You're not on a stage. You're not a newscaster live on TV. Let's just make sure that you feel good when you walk away from the interview. I don't want you to turn around and be like, oh, I'm afraid that I said that, or I didn't feel good the way I said that. We want you to walk away being like, that was really cool that I got interviewed and I was a part of this. I'm really excited to see it. I want other people to see it.
It's so many things that we do now, Heather, though, that if we'd done in our TV days, we would have been fired for.
Yeah.
Because, I always invite people before an interview. I say, hey, listen, again, like it's not live because of what we do. We're not sharing live, recordings. We're editing. There's always an editing process. So I want people to be able to share honestly and openly, but I want them to know that they can always come back and say, hey, I don't want that shared. Because sometimes in the moment, you might share a name or a specific detail that later you're like, that was too much. I felt vulnerable and I shared it and I don't want that out there. In the TV world, what you say in front of a TV, once you've signed something, that's out there, and no one, it can be used however they want to use it. And I would have been fired for telling somebody that I could go back and erase what they had already said on camera. So, but I mean, it's one of the reasons why we jumped into this space, because I want to know that when people share these stories with me, that it's safe, that they're safe with me. And even though there's a camera there, that there's privacy. And that, again, that there's a container. The set feels like a container to me, and it's very important to me that there's safety. And actually, it's a good segue into keeping the crew safe too, because as you know, these are really sensitive topics we're talking about here. Trauma is something, and I'm sure you have statistics on Gretchen, but trauma affects almost everyone, right? Like trauma is not exclusive.
It is not exclusive. I mean, but you can have all four, how many of us are on the screen? Three of us. I'm sorry, I'm seeing duplicate because of the cameras. You can have all three of us go through a traumatic experience, and not all of us will come out with trauma, right? A lot has to do with our risk factors, the kindling effect of prior experiences that we've gone through, adverse childhood experiences that come to bear later on. And then, we all have different levels of resiliency as well. And so I think the time that I saw you guys take on all of the projects to not just take care of everyone around you, but to take care of yourselves as well. I think that there are epiphanies that happen in this line of work where you think you're telling someone else's story and may find some connective tissue with a story of your own and have to take time for some support. And that's another one of the guiding principles to a trauma-informed approach. We have the safety, the trustworthiness, and the transparency, but also having some peer support available for folks when they come from behind the camera or in front of the camera, so that there's some time to say, that was a lot, and I've been activated.
I really wish that producers and anyone who is in an interview setting, who has to interview, would learn how to protect themselves in that way. Because I actually learned the hard way many times about that, because when you work in television, if you have something happen to you, you're like, oh, that should be a TV show, this is a crazy experience, and I definitely had experiences where I was like, I should make a show about this, and then interviewing people being like, this is a lot, this is emotionally a lot for me to deal with. So talk a little bit about that, and how to protect yourself when you're trying to connect with somebody and you're trying to walk with them through this story, but also be able to protect yourself emotionally.
I'm so glad you bring it up. So, Carol Sequigny says working with trauma is like walking through water and not getting wet, right? The stories hitch a ride, inevitably. And when I was in graduate school, there was no real talk about how to, deal with secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, and burnout. And oftentimes, as a clinician, you would be the youngest, least experienced person on the team getting the heaviest cases because somebody else had gotten burned out on them, right? And working with the client. And so one of the things that progressively, I think, programs of study and those of us who have been in the field try to impart is, how do you create your own protectorate, right? How do you remain mindful of your body keeping the score? The stories hitching a ride. How do you take off the stories, right? Are you a person that wants to come home at the end of the day and take off your clothes because that's your way of separating the workday from your personal space? Do you need time for breath work, to do some diaphragmatic breathing, some mindfulness practice, prayer? Do you need to take some time to jib-jab with your friends and just laugh, right? And exercise that muscle. The body can't hold the sadness and the laughter at the same time. So do you need to find some moments of joy to bring that zest back into your life? So having a care plan is an imperative for all of us, and that was something that I thought you guys did really well in partnering with us and working with clients as you were helping them to bring the stories to bear about how they wanted to take care of themselves throughout that process as well. So not just breaks during the time and telling you what they wanted to wax on, wax off when perhaps they misspoke, but also what they were going to do for themselves when they were done, if things came up and in between. And we had folks on call to be able to meet with them if they found that they needed to touch base with someone um, throughout the experience. And that's the same for the crew.
Yep.
So I want to talk about the once the video has been made. There was a few steps and revelations that I felt were important with our project. One is the importance of sharing it with the participants before it's shared with the public, because the last thing you want is to be scrolling through Facebook and all of a sudden you see yourself and you haven't seen the video before. That would be a tough experience. And in that premiere of the video experience, having someone like you, Gretchen, there to listen to the feelings afterwards, after the producers sign off, and having the participants take a second to reflect on how they feel watching their story. Do you want to talk a little bit about that experience?
First, let me just say how proud I am of you, Powerhouses. Literally, you keep segueing me to the next guiding principle of trauma-informed approach every time you speak, which lets me know that it's so ingrained in you that you're like becoming therapist by proxy. And so I'm just so grateful for how the care and precision with which you hold this process. So you really took us to that collaboration and mutuality. And that ties to the fifth principle, which is the empowerment, voice, and choice, right? And so when we had a debut of all of the videos together and really treated it, you guys did such a lovely job of treating it like a true premiere. Um, the folks got to come together. There were tears, there were shouts, there were cheers, there were, and everything in between, right? It was the gamut of emotion, but every single participant spoke about the mutuality that they felt with the two of you and with one another, even though they weren't working on the project together at the time because of COVID and the separation. They didn't get to quilt together until we had that momentous event. And they spoke of that fifth principle of feeling such great empowerment and how throughout the process they were empowered with voice and choice throughout every step. And so that collaboration and mutuality, the empowerment, voice, and choice is ended up being a byproduct, right? Because it was to get the story out there to help others. And what they said was, I felt like I was in a part of my recovery where I wanted to share the story to help everyone else and had no idea the value and benefit that I would experience and how powerful I feel by being able to have this venue to share my testimony. And the expression of gratitude, so much of the tears was about gratitude for having a forum in which to convey the journey that they'd walked. And so they felt excited to be able to help others, but also really, we had folks that had brought their children to that debut and asked permission, and we got releases for everyone to share. That was an important part of the process that I don't want to overlook. Before we engaged in that sharing, everyone signed releases to convey that they were comfortable with that share. And I think because the scrutiny on the front end about making sure folks were strong in their recovery and that they were stepping forward of their own accord as opposed to being chosen, they volunteered for the project and then were strong in their recovery, made it that much more rewarding when they got to that final piece in terms of feeling affirmed throughout the process.
Yeah, it was such a powerful moment, I think, for both of us, because this we're making it sound kind of scary to talk about some of these sensitive subjects. Like we shouldn't go there. It seems too hard, but I think we should also stress the positives for everyone involved once you get through it, and if you go through it the right way, that it can be so healing for people, and then it's so rewarding for us too. It's a little selfish how rewarding it can feel to find out that they felt so empowered.
I mean, it was a game changer, I think, for me when I realized that, because it makes sense to me that we create a video and that video helps to create ripple effects or raise money or raise awareness. That makes a lot of sense to me, and I was excited to be a part of that process. But this project was the first time that I realized that the whole project could actually be healing and could be something that not just the end result, but that the actual doing of something and the participation and the mutual, working together of all those when those participants said at the end, I remember one person in particular said, I feel like I'm in that next part of my healing journey. I think you said that. I'm on the other side now and I can reach back and give a hand to others. And now I know I'm on the other side. And I was just like, to be able to be a part of that story for that person. And then for anybody else who watches it, I was just like, wow, this is really awesome. And that was like, we were like, how do we do more of this?
Yes, let's do it. Yes, we need more of this. No, absolutely. It just, it's turning, they just conveyed that they were turning this negative story into this tool to help others, and the positivity that it brought to them. It was just incredible. Yeah, and I think everybody out there should do something similar.
I really do think so because, you said it's not difficult. It isn't. It just requires integrity and having that rubric, right? We spoke about having the releases, having people step forward and volunteer. If you're going to organizations to source folks to participate. In other venues, you don't have to worry about that power differential, but just be mindful of the setting in which the ask is being posed, is what the safety element would say, right? And then if you are going to be doing this kind of work, getting the releases that help folks feel comfortable, providing their testimony, take time to build the relationship, make sure that there's safeguards in place in between the telling, and don't just evoke the story and leave folks raw nerve endings with nobody to help them kind of put it back together, so that we're avoiding the re-traumatization. And let folks have a collective. Let them come together and celebrate the moment. If there is a collective that you're working with, that really leaves them feeling empowered. And throughout the process, and this is the sixth principle in terms of a TIC approach, just be really mindful of the cultural and historical implications and gender issues throughout. We worked with folks that were LGBTQ. We worked with folks that were Black, Indigenous, persons of color. We worked with males. We worked with those that identified as female. We worked with folks that were younger, folks that were older, folks that were sexual trauma survivors, domestic violence survivors. And so just being really, really sensitive and aware and doing your homework. Let folks be their experts on their testimony, but also take some time to understand the subject matter so that you're holding space with care, compassion, integrity, and empathy and knowledge.
Yep.
Well, that was the best summary you could possibly give of this entire talk. I don't know if there's a way, well, I was going to say, is there anything else that you wanted to add that we didn't touch on today, that those who are either thinking about doing video or are hoping to move into more trauma-informed production practices, anything we want to let them know?
That you have wonderful consultants in Make a Scene Media. They have the expertise, knowledge, and experience in bringing these stories to fruition in a compassionate, thoughtful way. They can help you to build your own rubric so that you too have a formula for success, and that you can have a synergistic effect in terms of your outcome, not just helping those that receive the message, but perhaps furthering the healing of those that provide the message.
Well, thank you, Gretchen.
Yeah.
And now it's our turn. We want to turn people to you. How can people find you and connect with you and consult with you?
Sure. The best way is to get in touch with me via Soto at sotoconsulting.com. I'm really responsive to that email. I'm back and forth between Yucatan and the States every several months. I'll actually be heading back to do some work for one of the local school districts and doing some training in clinical practice. And so excited to hear from anyone that is interested in learning more about how to implement evidence-based clinical practices for their team or system.
All right. Thank you so much, Gretchen. This has been awesome, not only for this conversation, but for, just your leadership and guidance from the beginning of that project where we learned so much. And I can really say that the tools that we put in place for that project, the things that we learned from you have really formed the backbone of the entire ethos of our company and how we've really tried to approach production since then. So I just want to thank you and just let you know how much of an inspiration you are to us. And we're looking forward to working with you hopefully very soon.
I can't thank
Absolutely.
you
Thank you
enough.
so much.
It's a privilege. Your curiosity, humility, and collaboration was just a gift. I learned from you powerhouse dynamos like all the time, and so I'm fangirling out on my end. Just really appreciate the work that you do and your contributions. It's a privilege.
Thank you.